All right, it's been a couple of weeks. And what I'd like to do, we're going to be working on Parak Zion again, chapter 7. We got a little bit into it. Just give you a brief summary of the first handful of lines that we talked about already before we continue. Just kind of a preview. As I said, chapter 7 or Parak Zion continues dealing with the Nefesh HaBahamit. It talks about Klipat Noga, the Klipa that is able to express itself at some point, potentially to bring us to Kedusha, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then the next chapter is going to deal almost exclusively, not exclusive, but almost exclusively with having when a person eats something that's not kosher or eats something that they shouldn't have eaten. I'm not talking health-wise right now. And I will say that of all the chapters in Tanya, it has some, let's just say, scary stuff. So I'll prepare you. We have at least a couple of classes, at least in chapter 7 to go, at least if not 3. It's long before we get to Parak Chet. And before that next chapter, when we get to Chet, I'll tell you to buckle up. So don't worry about it yet. But I got to keep you, interested in saying, what could that possibly be? So you'll keep coming back. Okay, so what we've established in the beginning of this chapter is that the Admor HaZaken, also known as the Baal Tanya, also known as the Alter Rebbe, has divided up everything in existence to 3 basic categories. And we gave some like random percentages to explain this. 5% things in existence are kedusha, and again that means inherently kadosh. Things such as talit, tefillin, Shabbat candles, a Sefer Torah, mezuzah, that you look at it and you see kedusha. The other end of the spectrum of 5%, or the other 5%, is the gimel klipot hatmeot, things that are absolutely with almost no possibility of being able to be raised up out of tum'ah, out of the extreme other end of kedusha, the sitra achra, that cannot be revived, cannot be enhanced to be brought to a level of kedusha. Generally speaking, we'll see that's not 100% accurate. And the other 90% of items that exist in the world are klipat noga. Again, I know this is repetitious, but it's really important to understand this. What the Baal Tanya is telling us, that these other 90% things in this world are, in fact, klipat noga, means again that there's this shell that you cannot look at it and see inherently that the item that's in question is kedusha, but it has the potential to become either kedusha or chas v'chalila to go the other way, to be gimel klipot hatmeot. Who is it depend on? You and me. It depends on what we do with the object, what we think about the object, what we say about the object. It can be something as simple as I say as a cell phone, something as a cup. He'll give a couple of examples. I don't need to provide you with others. But he says that even when we talk about not even items, but even machshava dibur ma'aseh, when we have thoughts, speech, action that are not inherently directly connected to Hashem and the ratzon of Hashem at that moment, it doesn't mean that the thoughts, the speech, or the action is inherently bad. Potentially could be, but it is klipat noga. When I'm sitting and thinking, I don't really care too much about sports. I'm from Chicago, so unfortunately, there's not too much to be happy about usually. But let's assume I was really into sports. So sitting here thinking about sports scores and statistics, it may be a waste of time. It may be interesting. I might like it. It's not inherently bad, but it's klipat noga. It doesn't have inherent kedusha. It's definitely not gimel klipot hatmeot. It's not the extreme end that cannot be raised to some level of kedusha. When I am speaking to someone about the weather, or I'm speaking to someone about my trip to Caesarea yesterday for a wedding, again, it's nice discussion. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not inherent kedusha. And when I'm doing action, such as eating, such as maybe gardening when it's not Shemitah, all these things, again, nothing wrong with them. They're klipat noga, and it's up to me somehow to make that action, that speech, that thought to be raised. And when it's not, it's directly as a result only of my nefesh bahamit, my animalistic soul. And we said that all of the midot tovot that we have in our nefesh bahamit, this is where we left off. I'm going to pick up with the slide in a minute. That even all of our good actions that we do, the positives that we do, still are as a result of nefesh bahamit that we've already discussed earlier. And if I, do an action that's not necessarily a mitzvah, I do something positive. I'm nice. I do something nice. It's not necessarily a mitzvah. That's still coming from klipat, from the nefesh bahamit, and needs to be elevated to a different level if I want to do that. Now, it's all nice in theory here. Okay, we're going to talk tachlis in a minute, but before we do, let's take a look at a couple of slides from Rav Steinsaltz. For those of you who didn't hear before, I kind of was up most of the night last night. We were Baruch Hashem at a wedding. I was in Sadar Kedushin for a cousin last night up in Caesarea. We stayed in the area and didn't sleep so great. So bear with me if I misstep a little bit. Okay, this is where we left off last week. The last line we said was Shemimena ba'ot midot tovot shebenefesh bahamit shebeYisrael k'mo shekatuv le'el. We want to explain, what does this mean? Yisrael, but now we know that there are three characteristics or three character traits that identify someone as a Jew. Interestingly enough, a side story. Many of you know, I think, that when I was Rav in the shul in Chicago, that one of the members of the shul was a Moshe Feinstein's granddaughter. So I've heard, and grandson-in-law. And so I heard many stories of Rav Moshe firsthand, Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal, from both of them, one time or another. And a very amazing story. If you remember, of course, when Son of Sam was murdering people, and they didn't know, of course, who it was, and it turns out to be Berkowitz they caught, and someone came to tell the Rosh Hashiva, to tell Rav Moshe Zatzal, that it's a Jew that they caught. And so the grandson-in-law told me this, one of the few times he saw his grandfather get very angry. He hit his hand on the table, and he says, he's not a Jew. I mean, like Berkowitz, what do you expect? He said, he's not a Jew. He says he doesn't, and I'm adding now, he didn't say these exact words, he doesn't have the three characteristics, which we're going to mention in a moment. And turns out, tachlis, he was not Jewish. He did have a Jewish name. And what are the three characteristics of the Jews? Right here. Yisrael hem baishanim, rachamanim v'gomlei chasadim. We are modest people. Doesn't mean we walk around embarrassed. We're modest people. We are rachamanim. We have mercy on people, and we do acts of chesed. Lo mitzad kedusha, and he say, of course, that did not fit the profile of Berkowitz. Lo mitzad kedushat nafsham elokit. It's not because we have a nefesh elokit that we're therefore by shanim, rachamanim, and gomlei chasadim. El mitzad tiv'am. But rather, the fact that we're by shanim, rachamanim, and gomlei chasadim actually is part of our nature from our nefesh bahamit. Now that sounds counterintuitive, right? Because you would think that those things that make us unique to being Jewish should belong to the Jewish soul, to the nefesh elokit. You have to hang on for that. No different, in a sense, than something that passes from one generation to the next in a genetic pass down from the family. Shehem aggressivim, for example, you may have one family that the people are aggressive, paitanim, they are more literary, let's say. Now, I'm sure all of us have had friends when we were growing up, that everyone in that family, I had one, two, at least three friends that every single one of their siblings was brilliant genius. And it came, already we saw it in third grade, fourth grade, seriously, which was absolutely amazing. And also not such an amazing thing from others. So too are these good character traits of the Jews. It's not because they don't flow from the overwhelming kedusha that permeates us. They're part of our, in a sense, what we would call our DNA. a zoological profile of being Jews. The Gemara tells us that we learn from the pasuk there are certain character traits that are good that we have. That if the Torah not been given to us, that certain character traits that are positive, we may even have been able to learn from the animal kingdom. And he gives us two examples. Tzniut michatul, gezel minimala. The first two examples actually gives a third one in a minute. We could learn tzniut or modesty from the chatul, from the cat, and the concept of stealing or not stealing from an ant. Hamidot hatavot shebenefesh habamit shebiYisrael hem bemuvan mesuyam kamo hamidot hatavot shebalei chaim ela. The idea of our certain positive character traits are very similar in some cases, in some respects, he said, to the good character traits that can be found in the animal world. For example, he says, Hatzniut shel hachatul, the tzniut of the chatul. Let me make this a little smaller. The modesty of a chatul, of the cat. What does he do? He covers up whatever the cat expels, he covers it. If you ever watch a cat, they do their business and then they cover it up. It's not because he's aware of the presence, the godly presence around it. It says, I have to be tsanua. It's the nature of the chatul. He can't change it. In parentheses, you may wonder where the word chitulim comes from, which means diapers. It comes from chatul. Because just like the chatul covers up its tsoah, so too the diapers cover up that which comes out of the baby. In this respect, we could in theory learn the midat tova of washing our hands from a raccoon. It's not that the raccoon doesn't wash its hands because it sees it in the Shulchan Aruch that it has to do that. It's not like it comes from some place of holiness, but rather it is an inherited character trait. So too, we as Jews have through our Jewish genetics and Jewish DNA, through the nefesh habahamit, and again, we'll have to wait to see why it's more connected to that than the elokit, are a thing that don't necessarily come and derive from the kedusha that we have, but rather that are passed down generation to generation for these good character traits. Now, let's take a look. Let me make this big. I'm going to go back into the text and I'll show you where we're at. So right after the brackets in your text, if you have the text, right after that, we'll say Vehi bechina memutzaat. That's where we left off. We're talking about klipat noga. Remember, that's the shining klipa, the one that allows light to emanate. I was thinking, I don't know if I mentioned this, I don't think so, but I think it's worth mentioning in light of recent astronomical discovery that they discovered a black hole in the Milky Way that they proved mathematically existed, but they have only actually now found be able to see it on some powerful telescope. Now, what is a black, and you'll see why I mention this, what is a black hole? So many people think a black hole is that just as a space in space where there's nothing, there's no stars, there's no anything. It's not what a black hole is. A black hole is a source of gravity. Let's just say it could be a star. There's this gravitational pull is so incredibly strong that it doesn't even allow light to get out. It pulls the light right back in. Any light that may emanate from this star or this body, it's so strong that it will keep it inside. So in a sense, when I think about klipot tmeot, the gimel klipot tmeot, and the klipat noga, in a sense, in my mind, I'm making a similar kind of mashal. The gimel klipot tmeot are so strong, the tum'ah, the negative, the antithesis of kedusha is so strong, it doesn't allow light of any kind of kedusha to come out. So it's like a black hole. Now, is that an original thought? I doubt it. Because there are thousands of people that teach Tanya over the years, and there are thousands of people who know a little bit about science and astronomy, and I'm sure that mashal has been thought of. I just haven't heard it before, so I'm sharing this with you. The others are where there's some light that can get out. The gravitational pull is not as strong, and some light does exude or does come out, and that to me is klipat noga, that you or allows it to either shine or to enter. Okay, can remove that shell. So he says that the concept of the klipat noga is bechina memutzaat. It's kind of like the average ben shalosh klipot hatmeot legamre. On the one hand, from the 3 completely impure klipot on the one hand, uben bechina umadrega kedusha, and kedusha on the other. So you have a spectrum. One end is gimel klipot hatmeot. The other end of the spectrum is the gimel klipot hatmeot on one end, kedusha on the other, and all that's in between, he's calling it the average. That's memutza means, but it means that really it's not average, because the 90% in the middle is the klipat noga. Therefore, sometimes I move down here now. It says upamim. Sometimes it is included in the shalosh klipot. Lost the place myself. Klipot hatmeot. Skip the brackets. It's the source for it in the Sefer Kabbalah. Upamim shenichlelet ve'ola bebechina madrega hagdusha. Just what we said before. That sometimes something that's part of klipat noga, whether it's dibur maaseh, machshava dibur maaseh, thought, speech, and action, is not kashur to kedusha at the moment, or it's your cell phone, or it's a cup of water. Sometimes they will go down, be brought down into gimel klipot hatmeot, and other times they'll be hopefully brought to the level of kedusha. Dahainu, kishatov hameurav ba, that the moment that the goodness that is in this particular item, nitbarer mehara, becomes clarified from the evil that might be in it, and doesn't necessarily mean bad, just means not kedusha. Ve'gover ve'olev v'nechlal b'kedusha. Sometimes something that you have will be able to be used and be brought from klipat noga up to a level of kedusha. He gives us an example, and this is going to, not an example is great, but the statement he makes at the end of the example is phenomenal, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes on it. Kegon derech mashal, for example, someone eats fatted meat, which is an expression the Gemara uses for like a nice piece of steak. And for those of you who are vegan, I guess a good veggie burger. I don't mean that negatively, okay? And someone who drinks really good wine, literally means wine that has a good aroma. But the purpose of him eating this or drinking this is to open the person's mind to Hashem, ulotoraton, to his Torah. Kidama Rava, as Rava said, and we're going to see this in the slide a little bit more. If he's eating these items or drinking these items, as Rava did in the Gemara, we're going to see the story more in depth in the slide, but the purpose is to open the mind, to be more conscious and aware of Hashem, in order to eat for Hashem, in order to be satiated and be able to focus on God, and not be, if you're not familiar with the word hangry, for those of you not familiar with the combination of two words, hungry and angry, that very often people, plenty of people like this, that if they don't have what they need to eat, when they need to eat it, it gets them upset. Or another possible reason a person might be eating, you sit down to your Shabbat table, your Yom Tov table, and you're not just eating a nice piece of challah, you're not just having a good piece of roast chicken or a great sweet potato, whatever it might be, but you're doing it because of the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat and Oneg Yom Tov, and we're going to see again in the slide. It's not so pashut, but just take my word for it. At that moment, it becomes clear that the life source of that meat, of that wine, shayanishpat miklipat noga, was first influenced by klipat noga, because it's just wine and it's just meat. It's parv, so to speak. Not that the meat's parv, but it's parv on the kedusha spectrum. Listen what it says: ve'oleh la'Hashem ke'olah u'chekorban. Listen to those words again, and I'll translate them. And they go up to Hashem like a korban, like an olah. An olah is a burnt offering on the mizbeach that went completely to God. Understand, and we're going to see in depth in a moment, that when a person raises the object of food that he has, and he raises it to this level, which is not as easy as it sounds. It just sounds like, I can just say it's for Oneg Shabbat. It's not. We'll see. But when the person successfully does it, It's ki'ilu, they brought a korban. They brought a sacrifice. And we know it says, the pasuk tells us, and many of us say this in the morning, that our mouths will pay for our the korbanot, meaning that we can't bring korbanot nowadays, more or less. And so what do we do instead? We read korbanot, we say them. And when we say them and we understand what we're saying, it's kilu we brought a korban. That's very nice, and we can do that with our mouths. But he's telling us something much deeper, that when we take something, as an example, food, and we take that object that is normally we drink wine because we like the wine, we eat the meat because we like the meat, and no longer we're doing it for the ta'ava, just for our own desire, but we're doing it because we want to serve Hashem, and we want to have the Oneg Shabbat, and we have the Oneg Yom Tov, and we want to open our minds according to this one case of Rava, which we'll see in a moment. What you've done is you've actually taken that food and you brought it on an altar as a korban to Hashem. It's a far cry from klipat noga, that was covered by this husk, by this shell, that the light wasn't really getting out. And it was your job to remove that, bring that light forward, then bring a korban Hashem. So in theory, when you sit down to your table, we already know, you can now understand a little bit deeper of what does it mean that since the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, that our shulchan, our table where we eat, is like a mizbeach. Now it makes sense. Why is our table like an altar? Because it has the potential for us to bring a korban to Hashem and how we relate to the food when we sit down to eat. It's an unbelievable thought. Last night, just another parenthetical statement, because I mentioned the Beit HaMikdash. I was standing under the chuppah. There was my first cousin's daughter who was Masada Kedushin for the wedding. Now, I've done, thank God, dozens and dozens and dozens of weddings over the years. Something just triggered my mind for a moment, and I just went with it under the chuppah. I had absolutely no plans to do this. Just before, when the rabbi says, it's the height of your simcha, but of course we're not completely happy because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. I just stopped, and I said the following, and I'm sharing this with you because it's still, a bunch of people came up to me and said that it really resonated with them. I said, we've been saying, and it makes sense, it's true, that no matter how happy the Chatan and Kala are, we still can't have the true joy because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. And I said, look, we've been saying this for generations, literally for a couple thousand years. And I stopped and I really got like, whatever. I said, die, chalas, enough, it's over. This is not the way it's supposed to be. It's up to us. We have to bring this Beit HaMikdash. And like, I don't know what got into me. I was like so overcome at that moment. I felt like enough already. We've been talking and talking and talking. We've been davening and davening. And look at what's happening in this world right now, whether it's in the United States or in the Middle East. And it's like you see the world, not the world as we know it, imploding, God forbid, but the mores of the world and things how they're changing, and like it's horrific. And this war is breaking out here, and this one's teasing war over here. It's like enough. And what we're doing here, learning Tanya, when we learn anything you learn, Torah you're learning, is one more ability, one more stepping stone to bring the Beit HaMikdash. People think like, oh, why doesn't Hashem bring it already? Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but it's going to fit in so many different places in Tanya later. Why don't we have a Beit HaMikdash? God, why don't you just bring it already? Because it's not so simple. For Hashem, it's simple. But it's not, because we either have to really, really deserve it and show that we deserve it, or be so terrible that Hashem has no choice but to bring it. And the alternative of being terrible is bringing good. But being good means doing something, not just talking about it. And that's what I'm talking about here also. When we are able, again, I keep saying we're going to see it shortly, we will in the slides, but when we take something as mundane and necessary as food, and we step it up, not just a notch, but to a totally different level, we bring it from klipat noga and we take it to the level of a korban. It's not just kedusha. That's his point. It's not just that we brought it to a level of kedusha, but we've actually made it into a korban as if it were the Beit HaMikdash and our tables, the mizbeach. That's another step. That's Hashem saying, beautifully, Yasher koach. And what's he then saying? Ki-evil, as it were. It says when Hashem says, when the Torah says in a couple places, either vayarach et reach hanichoach, that God smelled this sweet aroma, or it says it should be a reach nichoach, it should be a sweet aroma. What does that mean? I know some of you have heard this before from me in other classes, but it's worth it fitting in here too. What does it mean, reach nichoach laHashem? That it is a sweet-smelling aroma to God. Again, obviously, it's anthropomorphic. It's attributing a human quality to God. But what does that mean? God goes, whoa, smell that al ha'esh. I can't wait. God doesn't eat. What is it about? So when you come into someone's house, whether it's your house or someone else's house, you come home from Shul Shabbat morning, or you wake up in the middle of the night and there's a cholent on the plata, you smell like, whoa, that smells so good. Now, what does that mean? Yes, it smells good, but what is the real end game there? It smells so good, and I'm going to be able to have it. It's a promise of something to come. The korban that we brought in Beit HaMikdash, that brought the reach nichoach to Hashem, was just a promise of something to come. You're going to be a better person. You're thanking Hashem, continue to thank Hashem. You made a mistake and you brought a korban. There's the reach nichoach, as Hashem says, good step. I want to see more. There's a promise of something else. So again, the same thing fits over here. When the Tanya is telling us, look at those words again. Ve'oleh, right here. Where'd it go? Ve'oleh la'Hashem ke'olah uche korban. It goes up to Hashem like an olah. Again, that's one of the korbanot, one of the only korbanot that was completely burnt on the mizbeach and was completely to Hashem, so to speak, and not eaten. And a korban, and like any other this korban that we would bring, that's what happens to the food. That's what happens to the wine. That's when you're doing your part to also bring the Beit HaMikdash back to fruition. Let's take a look at this couple of slides now. First, I have to make it so we can actually see them. Okay. Okay. כמובן, שאין אדם יכול לעשות כל דבר שבעולם. ולומר שהוא עושה זאת כדי להרחיב דעתו להשם ותורתו. First he says, look, you can't say, it sounds like you read the just straight reading of the Tanya, which is why you can't just read Tanya without any understanding and explanation. Wow, as long as I'm doing this to open my mind to God and to his Torah, it's kadosh. So I'm gonna take some good marijuana, I'm gonna get high, I'm gonna take some whiskey, I'm gonna get drunk, because I want to open my mind to God. That doesn't make it kadosh. If it doesn't make a difference to a person whether they eat or not, in other words, the eating itself doesn't just take, when you have this passing or fleeting thought, doesn't take it out of the range of klipa. Furthermore, just because you had a good intention, a good thought, just saying, oh, I'm doing this for opening my mind to God. I'm doing this because it's owning Shabbat. Like it's a bracha, you're making over something, now you can eat it. So it's just saying it's for Hashem. That's not enough. There is no magical formula of saying something that automatically changes something from klipa to kedusha. So what is it? What is it? In order to raise something from klipat noga to true kedusha, it has to be done through an intention. Shehimu da'at, he's aware, upa'ila, and is also very active. Kol zman shuhoseh et hadavar. The entire time he's doing the action. Opening a bottle of Shivas, I guess that's not such good stuff. What's Glenlivet? I'm not a drinker. It's Glenlivet. And opening a bottle of Glenlivet and saying, Mila Hashem Elai, this is for God, and I love God, and whatever, and start taking swigs. That doesn't do it. Just sitting down at the beginning of Shabbat meal and saying, which it's a good thing to say, the Chavod Shabbos, it's for Shabbat, it's for Oneg Shabbat. That's great. But that doesn't make all the food all of a sudden kadosh to that level of korban. But it's when you have the thought throughout, this is why I say it's not so easy. When you have the thought throughout the meal, throughout the drinking, throughout the action, whatever it is, that is what can active. In other words, it has to be active throughout the time. If when a person does a mitzvah, they have to have intention. When you're doing something that's chol, we just, it's nothing of any kedusha, just, I'm eating popcorn, whatever it might be. You need more than just kavanah. No, it's if you're supposed to have kavanah when you do a mitzvah. I'm putting on my tefillin and I'm thinking l'shem mitzvah tefillin. That I have to have intention to, and we'll see why at a later date, why that's an integral part of the mitzvah and what it changes your relationship with Hashem. Kal v'chomer, how much more so when you're doing something stam, like eating, stam, like talking on your phone, whatever it might be, how much more so you have to have the intention during the action itself, not just at the beginning. B'mitzvah, etzem asiyai kedusha. First of all, the difference between doing it's a mitzvah and something that's not, but that it's not bad, it itself, the mitzvah itself is kedusha. B'chavanat mitzvahi beikara shelo yitkaven b'ota sha'alit v'arei mechavim. And the ikar, the main point, is to focus on that mitzvah and not be involved in other things at that moment that your mind doesn't wander. Easier said than done. Aval, but achila u'shtiyah, when it comes to eating and drinking, shetiyah l'shem shamayim, that you want to make that food, that eating truly l'shem shamayim, tzvicha kavana, you have to have the intention. Shetiyeh ha'ala positivit, I love the Hebrew. You have to have an intention of a positive, meaning a proactive idea that you want to raise the level of this item, to the goodness that's in there, because inherently this piece of meat, this bottle of wine, this veggie burger, whatever it is, has the potential to be raised to kedusha. You have to have that intention while you're eating it, not just for the moment of the time you sit down to eat. And if it's hard for having kavanah while you're davening, or it's hard to have kavanah when you're doing a mitzvah, to focus on the mitzvah, which itself, the mitzvah itself is kedusha. Alachat kama v'chama, much more so, it is difficult to have that proper intention. You want to raise something out of klipa to kedusha, but it's not impossible. And not only is it not impossible, remember, I'm just going to look at the beginning of my book, and you'll remember, we mentioned this multiple times, the source or the background of the entire book, and I quoted this a couple of weeks ago as a refresher, when the pasuk says, Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od beficha u'levavcha la'asoto, that this thing, tshuva and Torah, are exceedingly close for you to do in your thought, speech, and action. You're telling me that this is easy? Not only is it easy, he's saying it's exceedingly easy. You have to wait a long time to understand this, but we will. Bezrat Hashem. Now he gives us the other example. What about the first part was more about just drinking the wine, eating the meat. What about you're doing a mitzvah? When you sit down to eat your meal on Shabbat, years and years ago, I was walking when Andy and I were either dating or no, we were already engaged. Now we lived a 5-minute walk from each other. 7-minute walk, whatever. And on a Shabbat morning, I was walking by myself, heading in her direction, and I passed by one of my rabbeim. He said, Shabbos, and say Shabbat Shalom, Shabbos, where are you headed? I said, I'm going for lunch to my Kala's mother. And he said, lunch? I said, yeah. He says, no, you're going for Suda Shabbos. You're going for the Shabbat Su'udah. You don't go for lunch. You're not eating supper on Friday night. You're going for a su'udah. The mindset shift for a lot of people is very great. You're not just sitting down to another meal, but let's assume now you understand. You're sitting down to Sudat Shabbat, and you sit down. I've been to people's homes where it's beautiful. They sit down, they say L'chavod Shabbos, and before they start to eat, or L'chavod Shabbat, and you know it's for Oneg Shabbat. So when you're sitting at the meal, you're actually doing a mitzvah. You're being Makayim and mitzvah sitting there at the meal. Yet, eating the 3 meals in and of itself is not really avodat Hashem. For sure, obviously, you're doing a mitzvah. Because practically, proactively you're doing the mitzvah of oneg Shabbat when you eat. Ein ha'adam doeg kol hazman sheha'oneg yeh oneg Shabbat v'lo oneg kreso, unless you're thinking the entire time, during the entire meal, that this is for oneg Shabbat and not because of oneg kreso, you're not just because you're feeding your stomach. It still just remains you're feeding yourself, which is fine, your own personal need for food, but it doesn't lift it up to that next level of kedusha. Now, are there various levels? Maybe, if you have, when you have it in mind that bite counts, I don't know, maybe. I would assume yes. I don't know. But it's a challenge. Try it for one meal. See what it's like. I don't know if people do this. Maybe put a little note. There's some people I know who have a little card on their table, no lashon hara at the table, whatever it is. Try putting oneg Shabbat, a little note in front of yourself on Shabbat. See how easy or not easy it is. It's a challenge. I've never done it myself. Maybe I'll do it one Shabbat. And maybe even the Shabbat be the great one to do it because it's Erev Kabbalat Torah of Shavuot that comes in Motzash. But he's telling us that if you just read the words of the text, it sounds like all I need to do is just have in mind this one thing, and boom, I'm good to go. I've raised the. And by the way, these are only examples. You could extend this to exercise. You could extend this to music. You could extend it to everything, to 90% of things we encounter. That's his whole point. That the 5% of Gimel Klipot Tameot, no matter what you do, you're not going to change. I can sit all day long and thinking about this mixed of meat and milk, and I want to do what I can with it. I can't have any hana from it. I can't have any benefit. I can't eat it. I can't give it to a guy. I can't do anything with it, but I'm going to try and do it. You can't. There's no way to lift it. So that's 5%. The other 5% is kedusha. So that 90% is up to you and me. And when we do the right thing, it's kilos like a korban, and we bring it to a level of kedusha. We've salvaged it. Haklal hu, the general rule is, remember this is all Rav Steinsaltz. Haklal hu, the general rule is, shebek klipat noga, that within klipat noga, mitzuyim dvarim hamutarim, there are things that are permissible. Skip the parentheses. Shefshar shebi darachim misuyamot, that in certain ways, it's possible. Lahotzi otam me'aklipa, lafoch otam l'kedusha. You can remove them from klipa and change them to kedusha. Be'ota shah she'ela adam et hadavar gam im lo hayta zo b'shata mitzvah. At the moment he raises an object to a level of kedusha, even if it's not because he's doing a mitzvah, asa oto adam ma'aseh shel kedusha. He has done an action of kedusha. Hu hotzi yakar mizolel. He's taken out the goodness, not goodness, the cherished part from the zolel, from the, let's just say the negative. V'zoi avodat Hashem b'darga geboha meod. I'm going to say that again. First, I'm going to show you this highlight. This is an extremely high level of serving Hashem. You have to be exceedingly aware of what you're saying and thinking here. Meaning, let me finish the paragraph and come back with my own two cents. Why is he doing what he's doing? For whom and what is he doing it and why? Adam tzarich liyot muda b'chol achila v'achila. He's still continuing on the theme here of the food, that every bite a person's taking, in order to really raise it, they have to be aware while they're taking that bite. B'chol dibru maseh, or in every speech, any action shul said, l'shem mitzvah, l'shem mishamayim, that everything he's doing, whether it's for mitzvah or anything else, it has to be l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. With every swallow, he has to think l'shem yuchud. There's a series of words we say before doing a mitzvah, which is kind of like a preparatory statement, which is, I have in mind that what I'm about to do, I'm doing for Hashem. What's he saying here? It's a challenge. There's no question. But that we know, when I light Hanukkah lights, when I put on the tefillin, when someone is making chalot, when someone is making kiddush, it itself is an act of kedusha, and I have the ability to even raise it to a higher level when I have the proper kavanah. Now, I say that, we'll see what that means at a later date. And that's great. But when you take something that's not in itself a mitzvah, that it's parv, it's eating, it's listening to music, it's exercising, and you proactively think every step you take, every move you make, he'll be watching you. So the thought that you have while you're doing these actions has the potential to take something that's klipat noga, not kedusha, and raise it to kedusha, as he says right here, Zohi avodat Hashem b'daga gavoha me'od. It's a very high level of action you've taken. It's easy to take a mitzvah and bring kedusha to it. Relatively speaking, easy. When you put on the tefillin, when you do the mitzvah, and you have in mind, you're doing it, Hashem Yichud, you're doing it specifically to serve Hashem, and you have that, you've taken that mitzvah, you've connected to it better, we'll see what that means, and you've infused the kedusha with more kedusha. That's easy, in quotes. To take something that's not inherently kadosh and to raise it, that's huge. B'olam shel klipat no, you know what, I'm not going to read this paragraph. I'm going to leave off with this paragraph. Let me just take off screen share for a minute. And let's understand something real clear here. I think I've said it enough times to understand, and now you've got more of an insight or understanding tonight, I hope. Klipat noga is not bad. Klipat noga is not bad. And therefore, since 90%, again, a random number, 90% of things are in existence, are klipat noga. And it's up to you and to me, if we're going to do anything with it, to raise it to that higher level. That gives us tremendous potential in avodat Hashem. Because mitzvot that we have to do already involve kedusha. And when we infuse it with proper kavanah, we do the proper thing we're supposed to do. Okay. But when you are taking something that's chol, that's just not profane, but just common, not holy, and you raise that, that's a whole different world. That's taking it to a very different level, and that's the point of this beginning of this parak Zion. I thought we'd get farther into the parak, but that's okay. The main thing I wanted to really focus on was this Olad Hashem Korban. Bezrat Hashem, next week we will meet. I think I mentioned the group, maybe not. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be on and off. We'll have a couple weeks on, a week or two off. Baruch Hashem, there's a lot going on in life right now, and almost all Baruch Hashem good. So, I'll give you warning in advance when we will be missing unless you're differently. We will, of course, have class. Bezrat Hashem. Have a wonderful evening, and try that experiment when you get a chance. By the way, it doesn't have to even be on Shabbat. You could just sit down to eat a regular meal at Burger's Bar if you want. I'm not talking about anything good or bad at your table, especially if it's at your table, because we talk about the concept of shulchan. And have in mind, try it for a few bites. You have nothing to lose. You have everything to gain, and you'll see what kind of challenge it really is. But there are people who absolutely, I'm aware of a couple individuals like this, not here in our community at all, just a couple people, one in Yerushalayim and one in New York, I think he's in New York, that this is how they live. It's an unbelievable level to be, but you don't have to be like this all the time. You can't, but you can strive for it. You could try to work at it. You could try to do it even a little bit. And every bite you do take with that intention for a while you're taking other bites and having the drink, it will change that to a level of kedusha. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.